So over the past several years, I've popularized the term "nothing stops this train." And of course, that originally comes from the show Breaking Bad. And for those that have not seen it, it's about a chemistry teacher who gets diagnosed with cancer and ends up going to the dark path of cooking drugs in order to pay for his own treatment and to support his family. But of course, the moral arc of the story is that he eventually cannot stop. Even when he's past his cancer, he can no longer stop doing what he's doing. And by the 5th season of the show, his colleagues are telling him, we really have to slow down. We're getting over our skis here. And he says, no, nothing.
Oh, you think anybody's saying that to the central bankers? Hey, we got to stop this theft. Destroy the planet.
Well, I've heard stories of people inside of that network standing up and saying, hey, we've done enough, and then they get taken out.
Or they shoot themselves in the back of the head 3 times.
Yeah, stuff like that.
Yeah.
But again, it's all secondhand. I don't know if it's true or not, but
And by the 5th season of the show, his colleagues are telling him, we really have to slow down. We're getting over our skis here. And he says, no, nothing stops this train. And I've been using that term to describe what's going on with U.S. fiscal deficits. And I'll go into, during this pretty concise presentation, what that means, why it matters, and why it's so unstoppable. Because, of course, we're here at a Bitcoin conference, but there is this much larger dollar system that's happening around us and all over the place. And so the inter-exchange between what's going on in Bitcoin and what's going on in dollar land really matters for things like the exchange rate, things for the economy, investing in general. And so we'll start now. We'll go into these kind of pretty concise slides. Some of them will be simple slides. Some of them will be a little bit more complex, but I'll walk you through the parts that really matter. So this chart here shows 2 lines. One is the unemployment rate, and one is federal deficits as a percentage of GDP. And this goes back many decades. And as you can see from the slides, there's always been very good correlation between them. During recessions, unemployment goes up, the federal deficits go up, and during better times, unemployment is low and federal deficits are low. The one brief exception, if you can kind of squint and see it on the chart, is the 1960s. That's when we had the Vietnam War. So there's a little bit of an exception, but other than that, these are almost the same line. But what you'll see on the right-hand side of the chart, and I circled it in green, is over the past several years, ever since around 2017, we've had a decoupling. We've had shrinking unemployment, we've had low unemployment levels, and yet the deficit has blown out to 6 or 7%. Even before and after the pandemic, this was already happening. Obviously, it went into overdrive during the pandemic, but we're kind of in this new world now. I'm not the first person to talk about the deficits, but I am trying to bring attention to what's going on now that was not going on for many decades. We're entering kind of a new era. So that's what the deficit is.
I would wonder if this is the same unemployment measurement throughout. Because at some point they started excluding people that stopped looking for work after 6 months from the workforce.
Uh-huh.
So they tweaked the
That's a
metric.
really good point.
I don't know if this is that or not.
But the second main question is, why does it matter? Why are we talking about it here at a Bitcoin conference? And the short reason is because it matters for asset prices, especially anything scarce. So this chart shows in the gold line is the price of gold, and the dark line, the black line, is real interest rates. And again, we've historically seen that there's been a very strong correlation.
Dumb question here. What does she mean, real interest rates?
Well, that would be another question of mine too, because real interest rates would be the actual market rate for interest, but I'm not aware of that being. I think she's using the wrong term here. I assume she's meaning central bank set interest rates,
Which would be the Fed rate.
I'm guessing. I don't know. I don't know. That's an unanswered question for me. I'm not aware of real rates being even compared to Fed rate. Like, people take the Fed rate as the real rate, as far as I understand it.
Okay.
There's been a very strong correlation between these two things. And so for those that don't know what I mean by real interest rates,
maybe it's a composite.
This one is specifically the 10-year Treasury yield minus CPI inflation.
Okay.
And the reason these two charts, gold and real Treasury rates, are so worth comparing is
which means it's also not a real rate because CPI is not a real number.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
which also go to shadowstats.org. You can see that they've changed the calculation for CPI multiple times.
Yeah, and it makes me think of something Saylor said too, that you couldn't even accurately measure inflation. The mathematical equation would be a vector.
No, there is no, Mises makes this point in Human Action. It is impossible. It's like trying to say the value, like to say that you could quantify inflation into an inflation rate, like CPI, like an index, is the same thing as saying like we could have a value index. Like, oh, the value index is 4%. It's like, value of what?
And that's because supply and demand is changing on every single good or service in the marketplace all the
It's
time.
because every one of us want to buy and sell different things. So every individual market actor would have their own inflation coefficient.
Based upon the things that they want
The
specifically.
things that I'm trying to buy,
time.
the things that I'm trying to sell, when you look at all of the price changes of all those things across a period of time, that would be my inflation coefficient. You cannot have an aggregate inflation metric. It is mathematically impossible. So CPI is like baseless to begin with.
Yeah.
But then the fact that they have CPI and then they modify how it's calculated over time.
Yeah.
Again, when you go to shadow stats, the current CPI calculation will say something like inflation's 4% or whatever the number is. But if you use the 1990 calculation, it'll be 14%. If you use the 1980 calculation, it'll be 24%. You know.
Yeah.
So not only is it a baseless metric, but it's also highly manipulated and changes over time to back into whatever the policymakers want the number to be. You know, they call these things hedonic adjustments. Like the metric CPI that's intended to measure price volatility, they selectively exclude those goods and services whose prices are too volatile. Right? So food and energy being two big ones that they exclude from this. Is like, how many levels of retard do we need to go down?
And what is hedonic mean?
Hedonic is like pleasure seeking.
Pleasure seeking.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Yeah.
Primary reserve assets globally. They're the ones that compete with each other at that scale. And gold, of course, is pretty scarce. The supply grows by an estimated 1 to 2% per year, but you don't get paid any yield to own it. If anything, you incur an expense for storing it. Whereas treasury yields, dollars and treasuries, they grow at a much faster supply growth, but then you get paid this yield to own them. And during periods where the yield is rather high compared to measured levels of inflation, some of the investors that might otherwise buy gold get enticed to come back to the dollar and the treasury system. But then during periods of time where the yields are not high enough compared to inflation, many investors flock to gold. They basically say, if I'm not going to get paid anything on my treasuries, why would I own treasuries that are way more abundant than gold? And historically, this has been a very strong correlation. High real rates means higher gold prices. And on this chart, the real rate is inverted. So lower means higher real rates. And again, as you've seen over the past several years, this one in particular starting around 2022, we've had a complete decoupling in the price of gold and real rates. So something new is happening here in this kind of fiscally dominant environment. And of course, this is relevant for Bitcoin. A lot of people, if you would have said 5 years ago, if interest rates are 4 or 5%, would Bitcoin be selling out massive conferences in Las Vegas, and would it be worth over $100,000 per coin? Most people would say no. In fact, many critics kept saying that it's just a zero-rate phenomenon. It's some bubble that's going to go away as soon as the Fed gets any sort of hawkish in them. But what we've seen over the past several years is the Fed got about as hawkish as they could get. They even broke some banks in the process, and yet gold and Bitcoin both soared anyway because something changed. So these charts are a little bit noisier, but I'll direct you to the parts that matter, because this is the inflection point that really shows up. So the blue line on these charts is private sector year-over-year debt growth. So that's bank loans and that's corporate bonds, that type of thing. The red line is federal debt growth. So you have private markets and public markets. The pane on the left is 1955 to 1990, and the pane on the right is 1990 to the present. So this is a 70-year history. And if you look at the left side, for the most part, the blue line, private sector debt growth, was going up at a faster rate in any given year than public sector debt growth. And there are rather few exceptions that occur around recessions, and I mark those in yellow on the charts. And those are pretty, few and far between.
And then why would this private sector debt increase at a faster rate? Is that just through fractional reserve banking?
I don't know.
Okay.
I'm not.
what you see in the chart on the right is that ever since the 2008 global financial crisis, and especially ever since in recent years, we've been in this period of time where federal debt growth is consistently going up at a faster rate than private sector debt growth. And I highlighted again in those little green boxes, if you can see them on the right, that even outside of recessions, this is still the case. So this was happening before the pandemic, and after the dust settled, after all the money printing, it's still happening now. And the reason this turning point really matters is because when we look at what the Fed, what their tool is to control credit growth, it's mainly interest rates. If they want to slow down the economy, slow down credit growth, and try to slow down inflation, they jack up interest rates to try to make borrowing less attractive. On the other hand, if they want to accelerate things, they tend to lower interest rates. The problem is that, many decades ago, when federal debt was low and most of the money creation was coming from private sector, whenever they raised interest rates, they would slow credit growth. They would slow the private sector faster than they would blow out fiscal deficits. The problem now is that now that they have over 100% of GDP, which only happened in recent years, when they raise interest rates, they ironically increase the federal deficit at a faster pace than they slow down private sector credit growth. Basically what that means is they don't have brakes anymore. The train, nothing stops this train because there's no brakes attached to it anymore. Or another way of putting it is the brakes are heavily impaired. We've kind of gone through the looking glass. We're in Wonderland now, where the rules that worked for the majority of this time frame now work backwards. They don't really have a way to slow down total credit growth in the system. And that's a new phenomenon.
Yeah, for years, there was this saying, don't fight the Fed. Basically, like, you just always follow whatever they do because they're the ultimate arbiter of monetary policy and thus the vigor of the economy in a way. But now when you get to this point of it has no more credit worthiness. Like the U.S. government is 130% debt to GDP or 140%. Like it stops losing its capacity to stops losing its authority in markets, basically, because it's become such an indebted institution.
Yeah,
that it's not having the same effect on markets as it once did.
Got it.
So, and then I don't know, like. There's probably a lot of other macro factors going on, specifically technology. Yeah. That markets are much more interconnected than they used to be. They used to be much more insular. Yes. So what the Fed did could actually affect this insulated economy. But now it's like people have all these different escape valves into other markets and crypto networks and Bitcoin and like all these other ways to move liquidity around the world and take out leverage. So I think it's just symptomatic of it being disrupted as an institution. Yeah. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this episode, click here to find more just like it, and here to find our most recent episode. Also, make sure to like this video to help shine light on the corruption of money, and be sure to subscribe to this channel to stay connected.